pictures
Wow.
are the pictures are incredible.
I agree.
The pictures
Okay, so the name of this class is called Israel Matters. And the reason that we chose it is because it's an entendre. It has two ways of understanding it, right? One is Israel Matters. This is the stuff of Israel. So the goal of this class is that by the end of the class, we're going to have a pretty decent understanding of like what comprises Israel. So it will be the historical elements, it'll be the geographical elements, it'll be the political elements, it'll be the social elements, and it'll also be the spiritual elements. What makes up this one of the most dynamic places in the world? And then the other part of it is the sort of deeper question that I think brings us all to this class, which is the sort of care principle. Israel matters. Like why do we care about this? What matters about Israel? Why is it important? And that's also a key part of the conversation, because we can list all of the facts about Israel. We can express all of our pride of the amazing achievements that it has accomplished, not only as a modern state, but also kind of as an entity that has been in existence for thousands of years. But why do we care about it is something that's really, really profound. And the one part of my sharing that I wanted to include is that I very much feel like Alice and Lori and Barbara and almost all of you that had shared in some way or another, the sort of profundity of walking in the streets of Jerusalem and seeing mezuzot everywhere and like getting a feeling that like this is sort of where Jewish people live, and sort of having this kind of like strong connection to say, I belong there, these people belong to me and I belong to them. That's a really important connection. And then I would say, I've been privileged to sort of be in Israel many times, more than a dozen times, I would say, including living there for a year. And I think that, what Barbara, you kind of took it, right? The people are thinking all the time. I think that when we unpack this class, why is it such an important subject? Because there is an ever-present, constant attention into what this place means in the world. That's what this subject is about. It makes this the most politically complicated, like it's the hot potato of diplomacy, but it's also the sort of a subject of focus and attention, unlike any other place in the world. All of the statistics just are completely, they're completely impractical and cannot truly accurately ascertain why this is so important. It seems like all of the focus upon this place is just impractical and improbable. The Jewish people comprise 0.2% of the world population. This geographic land space is about the size of the state of New Jersey. It has a total population of 8 million people, more or less. Compare that to the 330 million people of the United States of America. And no other place on the planet has more attention than Israel. Why? That is something that I feel like is a part of my conversation, and I hope will be a part of yours. So taking a look at how we're going to accomplish that is that we're going to basically, what I tried to divide the classes into these three concepts: history, destiny, and hope. So how did we get here? What's happening now? And really, where do we go from here? Okay, so it's local. It's about Israel in itself. It's about Israel and its relationship to its neighbors. And it's also Israel among the nations of the world. It's what does Israel in a global sense mean? And they all deserve different conversations. So we're going to talk about how we're going to proceed through this class as you look at the syllabus, because it's important that at the end of this class, what you walk away with is not the answer. Boy, God, I wish we all had the answer. But you will feel comfortable participating in the unfolding drama that makes up the state of Israel, the people of Israel, the idea of Israel as it exists in the world today and, God willing, for tomorrow. So that's what our class is about. I hope that if you haven't picked up any of these books, they're great. And the fiction books are fun. The nonfiction books are really important too. And I'm grateful that you picked up those books. And really, Barbara, the courage of reading Ari Shavit's My Promised Land it's great. It's a great book, right? But as I put the asterisks because of his own personal problems, he has unfortunately, I think a sullied reputation for the way that he treats women in the world, and that's really difficult. It's like, do you like condemn the artistry of somebody because of their behavior? That's the challenge that we have. And then if you haven't done it yet, you need to start figuring out how to get daily news of Israel, because we're going to be incorporating that into the story. You need to know how to read the news, because it's not like every single day you need to be concerned about the looming threat that is happening from Iran or from the Palestinian people or from the political infrastructure in the United States or the interior political structure of the state of Israel. It can feel like everything is a crisis. That's what happens when you're a part of a people that think all the time. People who think about this all the time, it's in the words of a modern, sort of mid to late 20th century historian, his name is Simon Ravidovich, and he said, the Jewish people are the ever dying people, right? That we are constantly on the brink of destruction, you would say. But if that is true, that we are the ever dying people, we are also the ever living people. Meaning that we have sustained the most horrific moments of history, and we have constantly kind of like thrived from this place of looming threat. So what does it mean to live in that space? That's what I hope you take away from this class. Let me pause and ask any questions. Anybody have any comments about what it is that we're going to learn together, so that, and if anything sort of jumped out at you and you said you're concerned that we need to make sure that this is covered, that you don't think it's going to be covered, did you want to bring that up? Audrey.
It doesn't necessarily fall in that category, but the other really thing that strikes me when I've been to Israel always is how it really is the birthplace of all three monotheistic religions. And to me, it's not just a Jewish pilgrimage that the Jews should go there. I tell my Christian friends that they should go because the history is amazing. And I think, I think there's so much for everybody to learn and explore and feel that connection in the history.
Right.
I find all of it fascinating.
Yeah,
I was lucky enough to go to Bethlehem when we could go there, and the Tomb of the Patriarchs and all that, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, isn't that what that? Yeah, where.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like it's incredible, and I think that's an important piece to be able to share with people.
Absolutely. When we get
non-Jewish people, yeah.
Wonderful. When we get to the conversation about us and them, right? That's going to be an important piece of this, because somehow there are very solid, almost cement barriers between us and them. And what does it mean to live in a world like that? Any other sort of initial comments? Sherry.
What about podcasts?
Yeah.
There is a podcast called Israel Story.
Okay.
And I'm happy to add it. So if you like podcasting, that's great.
I do.
So Israel Story is wonderful. It's like This American Life. It's got that sort of same thing. So what they do is they take stories that come from, Israeli society, and they sort of weave through them. It's not all political. It's, very human centered, and it's a really nice thing.
Okay.
And I'll see if there's some other ones. I would say, I think that the Jewish people can do better when it comes to podcasting.
Interesting.
Yep, that's a good point. Okay,
I mean,
but Israel Story is great.
Times of Israel, is that their daily briefing? Is that a good?
What is that?
The Times of Israel has a daily briefing.
Oh,
podcast.
like a verbal, an audio thing? Yeah, sure. So I love Times of Israel. My preferred news outlets are our Daily Alert, Times of Israel. I am comfortable moving into Jerusalem Post, and I feel responsible to sort of navigate through Al Jazeera once in a while because
Yeah.
you just need to hear the story. It's not all bad. It's not all bad. It's not like every single day on the paper it says Israel's bad. I mean, it's most of the time, but like, there's plenty of just fine stuff. There's just news that's happening as well. Okay. So that's good. Let's take a little break now. Okay. About 5 minutes. Everybody sort of like just clear the air, take a walk around, and then we'll come back and we'll start learning in earnest to begin our class. So what I'd like for us to do is I want us to consider two questions as we're studying these texts. I believe there's five or six of them, okay? And these are excerpts from the Torah itself. And our goal is, for these first few classes, is really to try and like identify the landscape. It's very important for us to know when we are talking about Israel, what it is that we're talking about. It's also very important to be able to communicate with other people what it is that you're talking about. And part of your success in those conversations is to be able to identify what other people are speaking about so that you can relate to them in the way that they're talking. So for example, if somebody's talking to you about politics, right? You may think that they're talking about politics, but what they're really trying to talk to you about is the sort of spirituality of Israel. People do this all the time. They're like, oh my God, the history of the Jewish people, and it's so confusing. But if you can begin to identify what people are really talking about when you say, what is Israel, then you can have a conversation with them, right? So if they're talking about the threat of anti-Semitism, or they're talking about the internal politics, or they're talking about the history, or they're talking about whatever, culture, then you know how to respond and what language you'll use. So help us, we're going to build this together. And these 5 texts that we have, I would like for us to identify as a group, as best as we can, what are the definitions of Israel according to these 5 unique texts. So let's jump right in. And Roberta P., do you feel like reading? I'll let you have the first two because the first one's very short.
Okay. I assign the land you sojourn in to you and your offspring to come, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting holding. I will be their God.
Thank you. This comes from the book of Genesis. This is the moment when God is making a covenant with Abraham. The very next verses are that God commands Abraham to circumcise his own foreskin and the foreskin of his children. So God says, this is the covenant. I'm going to give you this land for you and your offspring as an everlasting holding. Okay, I will be their God. What is Israel according to this definition, this text? Who can kind of come up with an idea? And I'm going to leave the text on there so you can look at it. Maybe, don't worry, it doesn't have to be the perfect answer. Just give it a shot. Let's, construct it together. Alice?
Well, what I'm reading, it says that Israel is a land. It's a place to populate. It's a place to go.
Okay.
Spiritual connection to it. Here's the land for you to live in.
All right, so you got a couple things there. So the first thing is it's a land. It's literally a marking point, a location in space.
Right.
That's one. Right. Then you said spiritual something else. So which one are they? 2 of the same thing? I know there's a lot in the one verse, so it's okay if we unpack it. Which one would you want to stick with? Is it a physical location in space?
A physical place for you to go, for you to raise your children, for you to, and I will be your God in this place.
All right, so that's another important piece of it is that like we have to hold on to the I will be their God, and it's not your God, I'll be their God, meaning that there is this kind of like, this was maybe your spiritual connection. There is this kind of like relationship with a higher power that is going to exist beyond ourselves, beyond our own existence. It's an everlasting connection. So I have this connection with God in this place. My children have a connection with this God in this place. My great, 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 great grandchildren have a connection with God in this place. Okay? So that's a very specific kind of definition. Anything else to add? Those are all really good things. Yes, Roberta P.
I think it's kind of like a political statement that this is the original deed between God and the people.
Okay, great, right? Like, you know what? You're right. It becomes a political statement because we're going to have other people that say, well, this is my place, right? And especially as you read it, as we read the next verses, you're going to be like, wait a minute, there's already people living in this land. It's not like a desolate, barren wasteland. You know, it's one thing to like, has anybody ever lived in a brand new, never lived in ever before home? Never, ever brand new home, right? Like, it's pretty cool if you've done that, right? It's kind of nice. It's got one very special feeling. But for the most part, most of us in some way or another live in space that has been occupied by people before. So that is also an interesting piece that Roberta P. is bringing into this, which says that this might be a political document because there are other people that have lived in this place, but now it's different, right? Lauren.
But why does he use the word sojourn? Sojourn, what does that word mean? Is it?
Oh, yeah, like dwell. I mean, that's a great word. I would say, you know, Abraham and his generations, they were wandering tribes, right? So we're the descendants of sheep herders, and so
You mean temporary or like?
right. So sojourning means like moving around. So like
Only giving it to them temporarily or?
no, the other way. It's the land. So it's a great question, right? Is it a temporary residence, right? Are there the one thing that there isn't in this verse are boundaries, right? That's what you picked up on. And Roberta P, you're like, wait a minute, what are the boundaries? There's boundaries of space, and then there's also boundaries of identity. Okay, complicated stuff. So we're going to talk about what is Israel. Like, I don't think we got an easy answer, did we?
Wait, I wanted to add something to that. I had a problem with that word as well. And when I went to look it up in different definitions, I came up every time with temporary stay. And, and I'll read something. It's a place that is not primarily their own and is dependent on the goodwill of that community for their continued existence. So I took it as opposites. It's temporary. And then on the other side of the mouth, they're saying it's everlasting holding.
Well, wonderful. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
This is an everlasting, impermanent space.
They said they really didn't say anything. They were speaking from both sides.
Fantastic. Oh my God, there's something complicated here, right? So, and just to add a piece to what you said, Lori, is that there is a sense of the opposite, which is to like a civilization, which is also kind of emerging into the world at this time. Egypt already exists. There is, kind of the sort of like, the ziggurats and the sort of cities of Babylonia, right? Mesopotamia. So the history is that people are beginning to congregate and permanently dwell in one space. And this is a story about a wandering tribe of people through an unbounded space, but they can wander in that space permanently. That seems to be, I don't know, contradictory, paradoxical. We have to figure that out. Fantastic. Okay. All right. We're not going to answer it, but keep in the back of your mind, how does that compare to definitions of Israel that we have today? Keep it in the back of your mind, and we're going to answer that once we read all the texts. Okay. Roberta P., read the second one for us.
And Adonai continued, I have marked well the plight of my people in Egypt, and have heeded their outcry because of their taskmasters. Yes, I am mindful of their sufferings. I have come down to rescue them from the Egyptians and to bring them out of the land to a good and spacious land, land flowing with milk and honey, the region of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Ammonites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites.
Very good, right? That was actually really awesome reading, and all those people that we don't really that they're not really in existence anymore. Yeah, okay, good. So now what's the definition of Israel here? This comes out of the 3rd chapter of Exodus. So this is the moment when God hears the cries of the Israelite people who are crumbling under the oppression of slavery from Pharaoh. And God says, I'm listening, I've heard their outcry, and I'm gonna bring them to this land, a land flowing of milk and honey, okay? And this is another definition of what is Israel. So what is Israel according to this definition? There's more to it. It's not just a land. It's not just about boundaries. Yeah, Roberta S. Unmute. You have to unmute yourself.
It's, sorry, I'm new to this. It's safe. It's a safe place for them to be.
Yeah, it's a refuge, right? It's a place of redemption. So think about that, right? This is the definition, if I will, to just jump to modern history so you can hear this, right? Part of the sort of impulse of the state of Israel is that nobody else in the world wants these people. We were an unlanded people. We were wandering Jews, okay? And this is a promise of a place that is safe, that is redemptive, that is going to bring us where we will be in spacious land, and also a place that existed by other people before. Uh-oh, right?
Why? I have a question.
It's not like they're not going to the desert. Go ahead, Jerry, just a second. But like, just remember, people, even though Israel does feel like it's a desert, it ain't the desert. People were living there. Okay, go ahead, Jerry.
Why did God pick these people? I mean, I'm sure there were other people. Yeah, there could have been other people suffering in other places.
Yeah. Well,
I mean,
these are the descendants of Abraham. Okay. So there's a very important reiteration of the covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that comes out equally at this time. So God says, I had a covenant with Abraham, and I'm living up to my end of the covenant by restoring these people who have wandered into enslavement to return home. Okay. Which then, fast forward to, this will be like about 800 years later, and they're exiled from the first temple into Babylonia, okay, in Persia. And then after the second dispersion in the year 70 of the Common Era, there is this story of being brought back to this land, right? Remember, the people were in the land. So why does God choose them? I don't know. Part of the story seems to be that we're always keep coming home, right? We're kids who don't have a job after college. Jay.
Isn't it also that the Jews chose God? Also?
Well, that's Abraham. Abraham chose God, and so therefore God continues to choose them. That's a wonderful point. Jay.
The way I read it, I don't think there's anything ambivalent about these first two paragraphs, unless we think God doesn't know what he's doing. God is saying, I assign you this land, you and your offspring, and I'm assuming he has a definition of what the land of Canaan means, and he's saying for everlasting holding, I will be your God. It's very clear he's giving this land to our people.
Yes, and the fact that there are other people that live in the land is part of what makes this so darn complicated. Right. What kind of God, what is the definition of God that basically kicks out other people and replaces them with these people? What is, you could say this is divine election and this is God's prerogative, and that's certainly fine. Regardless, it is a part of the story. So what does it mean to be a people who know that they have a God that kicked out their neighbors so that they can live there? I mean, think about that, right? Have you ever had like a teacher or an authority figure, mete out justice in your behalf, and if you were like in a conflict with a sibling or a friend or a kid at school, and you were the beneficiary of the justice, but you still know that the justice, there was someone who didn't win, so to speak. So it just means that there's a part of the story here that we have to deal with. Jay, you want to go back?
Is he really, in the second paragraph, is he saying that we're kicking these other people out, or we're just bringing you to this land of milk and honey? And then, there's a reason, I guess, why the Hittites and Amorites and so no longer exist. But I don't read that he's saying we're kicking those other people out. We're bringing you there.
I had the same question.
Yeah, so this text is, we'll see as we continue on with the text. And I guess I jumped ahead, but it's there. It's there. You know what? And it's a really good point, because where it is and isn't may help us understand some of the nuance of the conversation. Like maybe we would do better to say, look, this is a place where we can all get together, right? Like we have a space here too, right? It's not a zero-sum game with the land. There's plenty of room for all of us. That's another way to read this. Wonderful. Any other comments on these two quotes so far? Yes, Barbara Annick.
You're going to have to just bear with my lack of knowledge on this. Are the Canaanites descendants of Abraham?
No.
I know the others aren't.
Right.
But I didn't know if they were. Okay,
No,
so none of those are descendants.
Correct. They're not cousins or anything.
Okay, thank you.
Good. No, and actually that's a wonderful question. I think behind the question is there a relationship here between these peoples? And when you get into the rest of the stories of the Bible, there's a lot of contention between the Canaanites and the Israelites. The Hittites actually disappear. The Perizzites disappear. The Hivites disappear. And the Jebusites disappear. But you're going to hear about the Amorites and the Canaanites throughout a lot of the Bible. There's some chat comments. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything. Yes, so Judy's got it right? Like the Canaanites are, so Gil, yes, and this was the part that I jumped ahead with. If you remember me saying that, because Jay brought it up, it doesn't say kick out the people in the text that we just read. It just says that, like, we're going to this land where they live. But there are not commandments to slaughter all of the Canaanites. Actually, it's the Amalekites in particular. And that's another group that lives in the area at the time. But there are unending battles against the Israelites and the Canaanites. Look, what's his face? Goliath. Goliath is a descendant of the Canaanites. Okay? Good question. All right. Alice, would you read for us the next text, please?
Sure.
So whenever I put Yud He Vav He, the YHVH, you could say Yud He Vav He, or you could say God, or you could say Adonai. Okay?
God spoke to Moses, saying, "Instruct the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land of Canaan, this is the land that shall fall to you as your portion, the land of Canaan with its various boundaries. Your southern sector shall extend from the wilderness of Zin alongside Edom. Your southern boundary shall start on the east from the tip of the Dead Sea. Your boundary shall then turn to pass south of the ascent of Akrabim and continue to Zin, and its limit shall be south of Kadesh Barnea, reaching Hazar Adar and continuing to Asmon. From Asmon, the boundary shall turn toward the Wadi of Egypt and terminate at the sea. For the western boundary, you shall have the coast of the Great Sea that shall serve as your western boundary. This shall be your northern boundary. Draw a line from the Great Sea to Mount Hor. From Mount Hor, draw a line to Lebo Hamath, and let the boundary reach Zedad. The boundary shall then run to Ziphron and terminate at Hazar. That shall be your northern boundary. From your eastern boundary, you shall draw a line from Hazar Enan to Shepham. From Shepham, the boundary shall descend to Riblah on the east side of Ain. From there, the boundary shall continue downward and abut on the eastern slopes of the Sea of Chinnereth. The boundary shall then descend along the Jordan and terminate at the Dead Sea. That shall be your land as defined by its boundaries on all sides.
So you might have thought that Alice got the benefit of reading a very big text, and you're like, oh, goody, you have to read a lot. But like, talk about enough names, right? So give her a round of applause. That was awesome, because you got all the names. I mean, I don't think I could have read it any better than you did, and I'm very, 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 very impressed. Okay, so what is Israel? This is from the book of Numbers. This is at the end of the book of Numbers. Functionally, the book of Numbers is really the end of the entire Torah, and the book of Deuteronomy is the sort of like last words of Moshe before the people enter into the land. So there isn't a whole lot more narrative or history that's happening. So the last part of the story is you're going to go to this land, and these are the boundaries. So what's the definition of Israel according to this text that we've read?
Well, again, it's all designated land for
Okay.
them to occupy and flourish. But
So-
it's always bothered me with there were people there first. And that's a conflict that we're dealing with right now.
So slow down on that one, because this text doesn't say anything about people, right?
Right, exactly.
That's an interesting point in and of itself, right? Is that like, now, wait a minute, we have a different definition. So if you just bring the three together, right? So compared what you had said before in the first comment, Alice, the first comment is this was place and location. And now you also have another definition of place and location, but they're different. They're totally different. One is, first of all, perhaps general, right? And this one is very specific and detailed. But another part of it is about people, right? Think about that. Your children are going to live here, and this is going to be their God, right? There's a connection to the people that live in the place. This is simply about, like, this is topography. This is how do you draw the lines on the map. This is a topographical map of ancient Israel. You have, to the north, and you have the Dead Sea, and you have down in the Sinai, and you have the Mediterranean Sea, and you have all these places, which, by the way, Alice, your important point is that there must have been people in the land because they already have names.
Right, exactly.
This is a big deal in the Bible. How do places get names unless there's already been people that have been there? So we have, for example, a wonderful point. There's a couple points, but Abraham and Abimelech, they make a pact at a place that they call Beersheba. There was never a place, so to speak, that was ever this place until the two of them came together and said, we're making a pact and we're calling this place a name that we both agree upon. So here is a land that says, here's a bunch of people, and here's all these places, but these names already exist. So already it's building up to this kind of discomfort that you have, that the people are going to have to go into a land that has already been named, that's already been identified, and they're going to have to claim it as their own. There are many ways to claim it as your own. You could come in and say, this is our land, or you could, and God promised it to us, or you could say, this is our land and God promised it to us and you better give it to us or we're going to break your teeth, or other parts of your body, right? Or there might be another story of like harmony, which, believe it or not, they were told to go and conquer the land, but the rest of the sort of book of Joshua and Judges and future succeeding generations is that there's always going to be people that live in these lands that aren't of Israel. Always. And if it's always the case, what is Israel? Right? Roberta P.
I didn't see that it was really specifically saying we own the land. It's just saying this is the boundaries that you guys can go and live in. So if there's already people there, maybe the assumption was you live together, not it belongs to you. Or am I missing something?
Well, I would so love that to be true, but it's absolutely, I mean, this is also, you have to think about the sort of historical circumstance, and part of the circumstance is all about conquering this land. It's all about saying this is our land and not your land, and that is a challenge of the story. That is a huge challenge of the story. It's and it continues to persist today. And what claim do we have to the land? God gave it to us. This is very, very complex. Okay? That's not the end of the story. So Jay and Roberta S., I see you waving your hands. So Jay and Roberta S. By the way, everybody, can you do this? If you go into reactions, if you have that on your screen, there's at the bottom of your screen that says reactions. And then what you could do is you can raise your hand like that.
Oh.
And you know what's really good about that? Is one is I could see you in a queue. Two, we're not such a big class, so I try to keep track of you. But then also, Alice knows how to react so nicely, right? Then I can lower your hand when it's your turn, so we don't do that. But Jay, I got you, and then Roberta S. Okay, go for it.
Okay. What if we pretend for a second that there is no God, and that this movement was more just organic, just like the Canaanites moved there at one time and the other ites moved there, and then we moved there. What if there wasn't a God, commanding, giving us this land?
So then what's the rationale? What's the reason for being there?
Just like any people move from one region to another based on economics, that these people were already there, maybe for the same reasons, and that we moved there for the same reasons.
Do you own your home?
I'm wondering,
do you own your home?
What if there was no God saying this is your land?
Well, I know, but let me ask you some questions. Do you own your home?
Yes.
Okay, great. What if I moved into your home and I said, this is a really great home for me, right? I love it. I love the view. I really love the artwork. It's very comfortable. It's cozy. I want to live here, right? What would you say?
But what I would say, this is my home, but I would say, let's say that my next door neighbor sold their home and you, being from a different type of people, moved in, I would be okay with that. This is a natural, organic, movement of people into my neighborhood or my country or whatever.
So one of the challenges is that if there's a belief of scarcity, there's a finite amount of space to occupy, and that seems to be challenging, right? Like, what if I say, no, this is the only place that I can live, right? And you could say, well, this is really great, but you can live over there. So there's a little bit of that tension that's coming out of this, of like, who has a claim to the land? You would say, I lived here first. But then I would say, no, I've lived here first. And that's part of the fight that's going on. And then there's another part of it, which isn't just simply that I'm moving to this land because I like it, and I'm going to take God out of the equation, right? Like God is an excuse. That's what you're trying to say. However, I need a reason. I need a reason to move into that space. And I need the best possible reason that I can move into that space. And at the time, it's the sense that this is a promise. I've been promised this land, my promised land, right? There's there's some complication to it. Okay, I'm not justifying it. Okay, I'm just saying that's the rationale. What gives you, Jay, the right to claim that property over me? Because you paid for it first? Well, I paid for it first. And you know what? That land belonged to somebody long before you and I ever walked on the planet. So what makes you even more special to do that? Welcome to the fight. Welcome to the
That
fight.
happens all the time. People move, are constantly moving. And let's say only 25% of the people actually believed in God, and they were just moving there because their relatives were moving there, or their other Jews were moving there, and it felt comfortable. I don't know what I'm
Got
saying.
it.
But
You got it. Good. Keep your mind, keep your juices flowing. It's good. Roberta S.
We're having this discussion, and I wonder if God's judgment was flawed in saying to a group of people, I give you this land, it's yours, it's for your relatives, it's for your ancestry. And it seems to me that God has made a mistake in doing this that has affected that area for up until today.
Right. Well, it's a really great question. Like we said earlier, right? What is the definition of a God that says, I'm going to redeem you out of the land of slavery, and I'm going to bring you to a land that where there are other people that live there, right?
Yeah.
How is that, just, right? So
Wise, not wise.
right. What's the wisdom of it? So there might be some justice in it. We just have to yet figure it out. But those are the questions. Like, what is the definition? All right, Fran, and then Sherry.
So do the Arabs/Palestinians also claim that God told them to be in that land?
Yes. And one of the issues is who got there first.
It's a real hard thing to prove. You can't prove in either case that it was God that told you to be there. I mean, that's a weak argument, I think.
Thousands of years ago, it worked just fine.
Probably.
Okay, but today it doesn't work at all.
No.
So when we're talking about, we're gonna fast forward this conversation to today, Jay, there is nobody sitting at the table that said God gave us this land. There's nobody sitting at the table on both sides of the table. So what they're fighting about and what they're contending on isn't some sense of like divine primacy. There's an understanding of what is it going to take for us to dwell together. You read the Tishbe book. She's smart. And I happen to agree with it. There is no one state solution, right? There's only if it's a state that we're going to even be talking about, if that's what the definition of the conclusion of this story is, a state, it's going to have to be two states. And then they're fighting about the borders, which is what we're talking about, right? Look at the borders that were defined in the Bible. So now we're okay, fine. Taking God out of it, I've got this text that tells me that these were the borders. So where's your text with your borders, and how is that different? So these are the things we don't have to answer, but these are the things that are getting on the table, okay? And we're gonna have to figure them out. Sherry.
I may be naive, but it just seems like people don't like us just from day one because of we were given this land, like the favorite child. The chosen people. And unless people that I know that are not Jewish, who are total believers in God, believe like we're the chosen people and respect. But I don't know.
Well, I think what you're saying, it's great. I know you're puzzling this out, right? One of the sort of issues that we'll explore in our learning together is how are Jews, how is Israel, how is this nation, which has existed in history for thousands of years, how is it going to be a part of the global community? Right? And this is one of the questions about when we get to the concept of anti-Semitism. Okay, and we'll talk about anti-Semitism. I'm not sure exactly how it's going to fit into the curriculum, but there are some key elements of what defines anti-Semitism, meaning anti-Jewish sentiment, and part of it is emergent from this concept that we make a claim on something that wasn't ours to claim in the first place. There's a lot of argument about that. That may make a lot of you feel very uncomfortable when you talk about going to Israel and seeing mezuzahs on every door or walking in the footsteps of thousands of years of ancestors. Part of the story may very well also be that this was never exclusively the land of the descendants of Abraham. Never, ever. So what does that mean for us to be a part of the world when we have this statement that also makes claim that we have a particular, a unique qualification to this land, okay? Permission to this land. All right, let's go in. We got a couple more texts. Hopefully you guys are starting to, we're getting your juices flowing and not too heated yet. But now this is a very good one. And this will be our last one today. Let's see. Franny, are you up for reading?
There you go. And having loved your ancestors, God chose their heirs after them. God personally, with his face. Note at Exodus 33:14, in great divine might, led you out of Egypt to drive from your path nations greater and more populous than you, to take you into their land and assign it to you as a heritage, as is still the case. Know therefore this day, and keep in mind that Adonai alone is God, in heaven above and on earth below. There is no other. Observe God's laws and commandments, which I enjoin you upon this day, that it may go well with you and your children after you, and that you may long remain in the land that your God is assigning to you for all time.
So I want you to continue reading because I have it here, but that's the key part. This is a secondary part, but it's an important element of the conversation. Go ahead.
Then Moses set aside 3 cities on the east side of the Jordan, to which a man who has killed someone could escape. One who unwittingly slew another without having been an enemy in the past. He could flee to one of these cities and live. Bezer in the wilderness and the tableland belonging to the Reubenites, Ramoth and Gilead belonging to the Gadites, and Golan in Bashan belonging to the Manassites.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. So now, one more time, we have another dimension. This is a different understanding of what is Israel. What is Israel? Remember, I distinguished, read the first part, not the then Moses part, as the primary text, right? What is Israel according to this text? It's different. Well, and by the way, also you see already, for those who didn't see it before, how all of a sudden the language shifts to say that all of these other nations are going to be driven out and only Israel is going to dwell in this land, which seems to be kind of a problematic force, but it's in the book of Deuteronomy very prominently. Okay? So what is the definition? Because there's something kind of like key to this definition that we haven't seen yet before. Candy.
The fact of the one God, that there were many gods or before, I mean, that's in context before Abraham. Now there's just one God and he's supreme and that's it. And he chose you and that's it, one and only.
Okay, great. So that's an important piece, and I'll elaborate on that for a second. That like now what we have is we have a land in which there can only be one God, right, Barbara?
Well, what I'm also seeing, 2 main things, that we are going to go to this land that there are a lot of other people already, but that we are going to follow God's laws and commandments. And if we do that, then the land will become, like, I'm feeling like it's going to be more ours because we're going to be following all these commandments.
Absolutely, right? What is the addition to this? It's really the language of the book of Deuteronomy is conditional acceptance, right? You get this land as long as you observe the rules. If you don't observe the rules, then I'm going to kick you out of the land. And that is a common refrain in the book of Deuteronomy. So what is the message of this text? This message is, here's the land I'm giving you when you observe the mitzvot. Do all the things that I told you, and you get to live long in the land. So built with Candy's comment, which is appropriate, is that this is a land in which there is only one God, and that only one God has a unique set of rules and responsibilities, unlike any other nation that has ever existed on the planet before this one. There isn't an ethical code that you find in Egyptian history or in Mesopotamian history. So this is a brand new ethical code. There might be like elements that sort of, are woven into this stuff from other societies, but ultimately this sort of like, ethic of empathy that is taught in, or what do they call it? Ethical monotheism. Right? It's not just a belief in one God. It's a belief that this God has a certain, human capacity dimension to it. How we treat each other, how we comport ourselves in the world, and how we sort of, express our devotion to this divine source. Those all have a moral imperative connected to them, right and wrong. There's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And the land is do all the right things and you live well in the land. Do all the wrong things and guess what happens? You get kicked out. By the way, is this successful? Do we ever know Israel living in the land for a long time based on right and wrong? Not very, not very. Even by the end of the Torah, God's already like saying, you guys are going to break the rules and I'm going to just, I'm going to disappear and you're going to lose the land. And, what a terrible book that we just read. God says, I promised you this land, but then you're going to come into the land and you're not going to follow the rules. Shame on you. And I'm going to kick you out and you're not going to be my special people anymore. Right? And then the people say, but we're sorry. And God says, I forgive you. And then the people forget what they've done and they descend back into a disobedience and they get kicked out of the land and they return. It's an unbelievable cycle. There's a cycle here that's sort of, manifesting. So what is Israel? You could say it's like, we're gluttonous for punishment, right? We just can't follow the rules. God's expectations are too great for us. You could say that, or you could say we're just not good enough yet. That's a big statement that a lot of people say. God has established for us a lofty vision of human dignity, and it is not one that we have achieved yet as a people. All right, any other additions to this moment? Let's just ask the question now. Now, when you think about Israel today, okay, how do the definitions that we find in the Bible differ? What's missing? If somebody was to ask you, what is Israel today? Would you go through any of these definitions that we've studied and explored here? Would you use the Bible as your definition, Roberta asked? What would you do?
I'm supposed to press this. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I got you. I saw your hand.
I just say it's not safe. It was told that it was going to be a safe place for them. It's not.
Yeah, that's great. Right? Like the promise is that the lion will lie down with the lamb, that that everybody will get to sit in their fig tree. Mazel tov, Judy. Everybody say mazel tov.
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov. Congratulations. We'll see you next week if you make it to class. Have a great weekend. Congratulations. All right. So, if the text that we talked about is this sort of redemptive space, right? Israel has to exist because there's no other safe place in the world. Then we also have to contend with the reality that it's never been safe.
That's right.
Never been safe.
Yeah.
So, or maybe that the moments, because it's not entirely true. There have been moments of safety and security. They just have been infrequent and certainly not consistent throughout history. If there's anything that's consistent throughout the history of the Jewish people in this land, is that it has not been a safe space. So then you would be like, what? Why am I a part of these people? Can't I just like go live in another place where it's a lot more safe and there's a lot fewer demands on me? I mean, America is good. Except right now with the politics, but America is good, right? Like it's wonderful. Or forget that. Can we go to Maui, right? Like who wants to? how is it bad in Maui, right? Or go to Tahiti when the most important thing is like, how fresh is the fruit going to be? And like, we're so bored. Like I can't say it because I'm being recorded, right? But like, it's a very comfortable, relaxing place. And when you don't have a lot to think about, you really enjoy life, right? So like, how come that's not paradise for us? What is it, Jeannie?
I was thinking that what I don't see now in the land of Israel, which they talk about in this Torah portion, is that there are not a group of people following the mitzvot, that there are a small group who are bent on doing and following everything, exactly in their own way, exactly. And then there's a much larger part of the population that's very secular. And so, yeah, this is like, if God, he or she thought there'd be one people, one voice, one way of following the rules, this is certainly not the case now.
Yeah, it's a really great thing. So I've been rereading the other parts of the Bible, and I'm in the book of Jeremiah right now, and it's just fascinating because one of the things that God says after the exile, he says, so once all the people go into exile, the good people I'm going to bring back, right? Like there's some good people, but I had to exile everybody, the good and the bad, because there was just too much bad, right? But the good people I'm going to bring back. So that's another tension in this story that like, there's always going to be, a smaller group of people that hold us together. And is that enough? I think is the question. Is that enough to sustain this people? Or is there also a really important and deep lesson to learn from the fact that the majority has never fully adhered to the commandments that have been given to them from Mount Sinai? That's something to hold on to. I hope I responded to your question. Barbara, last comment for our day, and then we'll wrap up.
I was going to say, if all the Jews got some island off in the Pacific somewhere, if we all, even all the Jews from the United States went there, in a way, I think that when there's a little bit of a conflict, we have a power of rising up. And that I think there would be a lot of complacency. Forget like, how Jewish are you argument if we're all in one place, because that would probably occur. But I think that when there is some strife, there is sort of we have to toughen up and we have to make sure we stay for the future generations. And I think that maybe it would all kind of like fizzle out.
Interesting. Maybe, maybe not, right? There's a wonderful book, and I'll leave it with this. Michael Chabon. He wrote The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. He also wrote The Yiddish Policemen's Union. And basically it's this fantasy of what happens if they don't get Israel. They get Alaska, because that was actually one of the places that was on the table when they were trying to figure out a place where they could send the Jews. That in Arizona, by the way. Okay.
Really?
Right? Lots of places in the world. Uganda, right? There were all these places where they thought the Jewish people could go. So if you put all the Jewish people in one place, right? One thing would be like, oh my God, would the Jewish people actually really succeed? Would they get along? But the other side is that like, part of the Jewish impulse is to cry for the injustices of the world. And if nobody is there to cry for the injustices of the world, the Jewish people would have to cry out. And that's why they can't be in Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, even though that would be a great place to be, right? Because somewhere in Europe, there would be slavery and oppression, and we would have to cry out about it, because if not us, then who? Beautiful statement to keep us empowered, to lead us into next week. Thank you for adding it. So as we wrap up today, welcome to the class. I'm so excited. I'm really nervous about this because this is a hard subject for us to discuss, but I think that we're kicked off on the right foot. And I'm looking forward to jumping into our learning a little bit more deeply next week. Thanks for being here. And if anybody has any questions in between, don't worry, email me or give me a call or whatever it is. Okay. All right, everybody. Take care. Have a
Bye.
great week.
Mhm.
Thank you, Josh.